Chair recognizes Dr. Foxx from North Carolina for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Mr. Dodaro, for being here. This year, the unemployment insurance UI system was added to the high-risk list. In the report, you mentioned that fraud risks to the UI program need to be addressed. As I understand it, the current statute of limitations for criminal and civil penalties for COVID-era UI fraud and overpayment is only 5 years. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay. Legislation such as the Protecting Taxpayers and Victims of Unemployment Fraud Act would extend the statute of limitations for criminal charges and civil actions for prosecuting fraud to 10 years. What would the impact of that change be, and how much more could we expect the government to be able to recover as a result of this change?
Well, I think that that's a good change. Congress has already extended the statute of limitations for the SBA emergency loan programs from 5 to 10 or maybe 10 years. And I think it makes sense to do it for an unemployment insurance area. You know, we estimated at the low end of the fraud and unemployment insurance, it was $60 billion in fraud. We're working on a high-end estimate now, which we'll have later this summer. So there's a lot of money yet that hasn't been recovered. Now, how much can be recovered? Quite frankly, it's going to be modest. But I think there's also a benefit from a deterrence effect about punishing people who have committed the fraud, as well as trying to get back as much money as possible.
Absolutely. As you know, the United States Postal Service has been on the GAO high-risk list since 2009. However, since the last high-risk list was published in 2021, this committee came together to create the Postal Service Reform Act, which was signed into law. This law greatly reduced the Postal Service's unfunded liabilities for retiree health benefits. Along with this, quote, relief, the Postal Service is charged with implementing the Postmaster General's 10-year plan, which we believe will lead the Postal Service towards self-sufficiency. Do you have any recommendations for Congress to help ensure the Postal Service achieves self-sufficiency?
Yes. I think that the long-term need, well, first of all, Congress did provide substantive relief to the Postal Service, but it didn't change the long-term business model. And the Postal Service is continuing to lose money even with these relief efforts. So the 10-year plan being executed by the Postal Service will be helpful, but ultimately I think the Congress is going to have to decide what level of service that it wants the American people to have and how to provide a stable funding arrangement and whether or not they want the Postal Service to be self-supporting.
Let me ask you a follow-up before you continue that.
Right.
The high-risk list mentions that USPS should continue to take actions under its own authority to enhance its financial viability while still meeting its mission to provide universal postal service. What actions under its own authority can USPS take to enhance its financial viability?
I'll ask Mr. Trimble, our expert, to give you an answer there.
Thank you.
Yeah, currently we have ongoing review of the USPS's new 10-year strategic plan and the number of projects they have in there to address their costs and also service and reorganization efforts they have underway to address their cost structures. So I think really it's going to be to execute against that plan, and that's something we'll be monitoring in our ongoing review.
Great. Mr. Dodaro, again, one of the key points made in the high-risk list is that the Office of Management and Budget, OMB, is critical to addressing high-risk areas because it can lead and support agencies. How can Congress help OMB conduct more meaningful oversight to help improve high-risk programs? And along with that, I'll note that there's no Inspector General there. How would having an Inspector General help this situation?
Well, first, I think OMB, the first thing Congress could do is hopefully work with the administration to get a confirmed controller in that position. There hasn't been a confirmed controller in that position for at least 7 years now, and that's a problem in terms of us working with them to not only deal with high-risk areas, but also improper payments and also all financial management issues. So I think that there needs to be additional leadership responsibilities there. I've been very pleased with the cooperation from the Deputy for Management, Jason Miller. We've had tripartite meetings between GAO, OMB, and the agencies on the list. OMB's always looking for resources, just like everybody else, so Congress should look carefully at those issues. Inspector generals are an important part of oversight over the federal government, and I would, think that some consideration, and there is some merit to considering that, although OMB's in the office of the President, Executive Office of the President, so you'd have to look at it in a broader aspect than just OMB, because OMB is a very small entity.
Sure. Well, I have one more question, but I'll submit it, Mr. Chairman. I yield back. Thank you, Mr. Dodaro.
Thank you.
Were you wanting to speak?